tear gas and batons aren't holding them back. More and more people are joining the protests against Venezuela's government. They blame President Nicolas Maduro for the country's worst recession ever, and they're demanding new elections.
Stop the repression. Stop killing our young people at these peaceful protests. That's what we're asking for. No more repression, and that the government should understand that we want the general elections.
But the president refuses to budge. He's accused the opposition of pushing a foreign agenda, and he wants to rewrite the constitution without the opposition-controlled parliament.
I will proceed to sign on this historic day the notice calling into power a constituent National Assembly of the People with immediate effect.
The announcement sparked an instant backlash, with the leader of the National Assembly calling it the worst coup in Venezuelan history.
What
Nicolas Maduro is proposing in his desperation is that Venezuela will never vote in free, direct and democratic elections. We need to stand together as men and women to save the liberty and dignity of the Venezuelan people.
The political storm isn't Maduro's only problem. Venezuelans are struggling to cope with spiraling inflation and severe food shortages. The government is hiking wages by 60% and freezing all prices. But these steps aren't expected to bring much relief to a country where there simply isn't enough to go around. And the rising tensions on the streets of Caracas suggest Maduro's political plans may be just as ill-fated as his economic agenda. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
And joining me now from London for more on Venezuela's crisis is Carlos de Sousa. He's a Latin America's economist at research group Oxford Economics. Carlos, thank you very much indeed once again for joining us here on Money Talks. Carlos, you are yourself originally from Venezuela. From the people that you're in touch with back in the country, give us an idea of what it's like on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's correct. So my family fortunately has enough savings in sovereign currency to waive the crisis relatively well, so they're not starving as very poor people are. But living standards in Venezuela have deteriorated very, very sharply. People no longer, even those in the middle class who have enough money to afford sufficient food, they cannot choose what they eat, they just eat whatever they can find in the market because scarcity is very severe. Also, the healthcare system has deteriorated very sharply, and some people are dying of things that nobody should die of because they are perfectly easy to cure, but simply there are not enough medicines for treatment. Same happens to newborns, for example. Many newborns, many more than before, newborns are dying because simply they cannot get sufficient good attention in the hospital.
Yeah, trying times.
To give you another example,
yes.
Most of my friends, if I may, most of my friends and in an increasing number of my acquaintances no longer live in the country or are planning to move out of the country very soon. Those who are in the poorest strata of society simply cannot leave the country because they don't have enough money.
Indeed. The problem, as you've alluded to there, is the fact that there's runaway inflation. What can the government do right now to rein that in?
Yeah, we estimate that inflation right now is around 650%, and it will continue to accelerate towards 760% by the end of the year. And to be honest, in the very short term, there is nothing the Venezuelan government can do to bring down that inflation. So inflation, chronic inflation, and very high and hyperinflation is a problem that has been well known by economists for many decades, and its solution has been very well known. In fact, many Latin American countries underwent very high periods of inflation and hyperinflation as well in the 80s and the 90s. And it takes quite a few years to bring down inflation to, let's say, single digits. To do that, you need to have an independent central bank that doesn't finance the government directly, that targets low inflation and stable inflation by controlling or influencing interest rates in the market.
Carlos,
The Venezuelan central bank is not an independent central bank.
Indeed.
Yes.
Carlos, we're just running out of time. I want to squeeze one more question in. Venezuela has about a $3.5 billion bond repayment coming up in October and November. Could we see a default by the government? And if it does, is there likely to be a wider contagion effect from that?
We don't see a default this year taking place. The willingness to pay remains very high from the government, and they still have enough money to pay the October-November maturities of $3.5 billion that you just mentioned. So in our baseline scenario, the Venezuelan government will not default just yet. And in fact, our research shows that Venezuela could continue paying its external debt in 2018 as well. If the oil price doesn't increase from the current around $50 per barrel for the WTI, if it doesn't increase at all by 2019, then Venezuela would run out of money by 2019. And of course, I'm not saying that a default is not possible. It is very well possible, and that's why investors can get a very high interest rate when they invest in Venezuelan bonds. If that were to happen, again, I don't think there will be any contagion to emerging markets for several reasons. One of them is that the default would be very expected by the markets.
Right.
It's been expected for the last 2 years at least. And another reason is that there are no financial linkages, or almost no financial linkages at all, between Venezuela and other countries.
Carlos,
And Venezuela
Carlos de Sousa.
imports have contracted 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm really sorry to interrupt there. We are running out of time. It is going to be a story that we're going to track very closely in the weeks and months to come. But for now, Carlos de Sousa, Oxford Economics in London. Thank you so much.